Fantasy Football Show. I'm Alfredo Brown. Got Dave Kluge here, and of course, our special guest, Julia Papworth, who earlier in the week we talked to her about 9 players that are rising up our fantasy football ranks, and now it's going to be a little bit sadder and angrier, and negative, and 9 players that are plummeting down our fantasy football rankings. Guys, let's not waste any time. Let's just get right into it. Dave, who's falling down your rankings and why?
DeAndre Hopkins right now it's really tough for me to pull the trigger on him when I see him in drafts. Second fewest yards per game last year since his rookie season. You don't like to see that for a guy playing in his age 31 year. It's very rare that we see a guy trending downward in his age 31 year and then just turning around at age 32. And then you look at what the Tennessee Titans have done so far this offseason. They've added Calvin Ridley. They've added Tyler Boyd. They have Tajay Spears there already, but then they added another pass catching back in Tony Pollard. It's just all of a sudden we see this touch squeeze where it's going to be a lot harder for DeAndre Hopkins to maintain the same volume that he saw last year. We've already heard Brian Callahan, the new head coach there, talking about how he plans to use Calvin Ridley in this Jamar Chase role. You don't hear him saying those same things about DeAndre Hopkins. So DeAndre Hopkins, I think that he does have a play style where he doesn't win on athleticism. He wins on the really technical abilities at the top of the route and his contested catch abilities and those things that should lend to a longer career. But for me, it just comes down to the team that he's on, the competition that he has for targets. It's really tough to see him having much of a ceiling, even if you're drafting him at wide receiver 45. Like, cool, he might finish as the wide receiver 40 or the wide receiver 35, but I'm not sure that helps you all that much in fantasy. When I'm at that point in the draft, I'm looking for guys that have a really high ceiling, and I'm just not seeing it with Hopkins this year.
If DeAndre Hopkins is a rankings faller, ipso facto, is Calvin Ridley also a rankings faller?
Not necessarily. I mean, Ridley's already getting drafted pretty high. He's another one that I kind of struggle to draft a little bit. Looking right now, he is going off
And
the
just to
board.
give context, by the way, like when you say he's being drafted high, this is in best ball. So there is
Right.
going to be there's going to be a preference to wide receivers, and particularly wide receivers who can catch the ball deep and make splashy plays. I just want to make sure that all of our
Right.
viewers and listeners have that context.
And I think Ridley does have that upside. But for me, drafting Ridley is kind of betting on 2 things. You're not just drafting Ridley expecting him to turn it around from a down year last year. You're also expecting him to turn it around after a down year, and you're expecting Will Levis to be good. So the path for Calvin Ridley to pay off at his ADP kind of needs 2 things to work out. And that's why, I alluded to it in the show that we talked in the last show where we were talking about risers, where I said that Tony Pollard is my most drafted running back. Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears are the 2 guys that I want in this offense.
Yeah.
I have a little bit less faith in the passing game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Titans in general, there's a lot of uncertainty on how that team's going to perform, like not having Derrick Henry for the first time. And, Will Levis has the possibility of becoming their franchise quarterback. We don't know for sure. I think we'll learn a lot more about how that team's going to run in the post Derrick Henry era after this year. And we'll have a better idea of where to draft people moving forward. But yeah, same with what Dave said. If there's more than one sort of thing that has to go right for someone, you kind of want to step away, I think.
Will Levis eats mayonnaise with a spoon and eats bananas with the peel on. So there's that big negative detractor.
There's always money in the banana stand.
Always money in the banana stand. Very good reference. Arrested Development. What a good show. All right, before we move on here, we are going to remind you guys, there's tons of ways to enjoy our show. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure that you are liking this video, you subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, share this with your friends, maybe talk about one of the players you think should be falling down our rankings that we didn't mention, or let us know if we got one of these players wrong. If you're listening to us on the audio side, the podcast, go on over to youtube.com/@footballguysfantasy, youtube.com/@footballguysfantasy. And as you're listening to this show, after you listen to it on the podcast, please be sure to leave us a review. We prefer 5 stars. If we only gave you 4 stars, I get it, but please, 5 stars. Let us know what you liked about the show and maybe a topic that you'd love to hear us talk about in the future. All right, Julia. This seems like it's going to be painful for you because your biggest faller is one of your Arizona Cardinals. Talk to us about James Conner.
Yeah, it's really sad, but I mean, we might be witnessing the twilight of James Conner's career, and thank you for your service, sir. He's done amazing things for me. Look, he he's never had a season where he's played every game. And that's just it. He's played 13 games in the last 2 seasons, and now they go ahead and draft his successor and Trey Benson. We all knew it was going to come at some point. We didn't know if it was going to be this year or next year, I think. And, Connor's 29, which again, ancient in running back years, right? And Benson's good. Benson should be solid coming in. Connor's fantasy finishes is still great. Like last year, he was 18, the year before 20, the year before he was 5, which was such a surprising year that I think a lot of people didn't see coming. And I think the two of them will be a 1-2 punch. Obviously, going into the season, I think Connor will be the 1 and Benson will be the 2. But there is definitely a world where that starts to transition. And especially
She said the thing. She said there's a world, Dave.
There's a
she
world.
said the thing.
There's a world.
That's my thing. I say that like every player, every episode. There's a world.
Definitely a world where that starts to transition to Benson being the 1, Connor being the 2. And if Connor has another injury, which let's be honest, it's a high percentage chance there's something that happens that keeps him out a couple games, Benson's going to get in there and he's going to show off. Plus, like I said, in the Riser show, the Cardinals added more weapons in other places, which might mean that Connor just doesn't have to do as much. They might not need as much from him. So I love James Conner. I will always love James Conner, but I think it's this time for James Conner. Riding off into the sunset.
First of all, I agree with everything you're saying. I like Trey Benson. Been drafting a lot of Trey Benson. I think he's a great running back. But when I was doing my deep dive on running back efficiency, I was really surprised to see this. Last year, James Conner, at 29 years old, had the second most carries of his career in a single season. He had the second most yards after contact per attempt of his career. He had the highest broken tackle rate of his career, and he had the most yards before contact per attempt of his career. Like usually we see a running back hit age 28 and they're trending down in every single efficiency. Somehow James Conner, the touchdowns weren't there. So the fantasy production wasn't there, but on an efficiency standpoint, his ability to find space, his ability to break tackles, his ability to generate yards after tackles, he had arguably the most efficient year of his career, which is kind of crazy to see.
I mean, I wouldn't hate it if I'm wrong and he doesn't fall down. Like, I wouldn't hate that as a Cardinals fan, but yeah.
What I like about Trey Benson is in the weeks where we know Connor will inevitably be injured, like this guy never plays a full season, then you're looking at Trey Benson as just like a plug and play top 8 running back for that given week, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, half a season, or 16 weeks. If and when James Conner goes down, Trey Benson is going to have huge contingent weekly upside.
I know. Is Amari DeMarcado still on that roster?
I think technically.
I think he is. Yeah, technically.
Remember that week? That was a magical time.
That was fun.
Good times. So yeah, it sounds like we're all just going to take these 29-year-old running backs and Bilbo Baggins them and just throw them on the boat with Gandalf and the elves and watch them just go into the sunset, because my next guy that I'm talking about is Austin Ekeler.
Oh.
And guys, like, I think we're just at that point, man. Like, Austin Ekeler has made his living. And by the way, we love him. He's the biggest advocate of fantasy football. And this is not a personal thing whatsoever. It's just there's enough factors here that make me nervous. And Ekeler has made his living off of touchdowns and receptions. And that has been the big thing for him throughout his career in what was first San Diego, then Los Angeles. And he goes from one of the most check down heavy quarterbacks in Justin Herbert, who's consistently in the top 5 in the league, now to Jaden Daniels, who, listen, I already had someone on Twitter tell me, like, you can't just extrapolate stuff from college or try to project from college. I mean, that's what we do, though, with rookies. You have to project what their tendencies are from college and what they've done in college. That's the kind of the whole point of watching college film and looking at college data. But Jaden Daniels meets the archetype of a quarterback that's not really going to be checking down. This is a guy that, if I'm not mistaken, had 1,100 rushing yards last season and 10 rushing touchdowns. This is not a player who, when the pressure hits him, he checks it down to a running back. He's either chucking it deep or taking the sack or running. This is kind of what he's done throughout his time in college. And I think that's what we're going to see more of in the NFL. His running backs as a whole, 6 different players, had a 10% target share for the entire group. Just to kind of put that into context, 23 NFL running backs had a higher target share than that in the NFL last season. So to think that individual players had a higher target share than Jaden Daniels' entire running back group, it's a little worrisome. By the way, Austin Ekeler had 13% target share by himself on the Chargers. So I think it's reasonable to assume that number goes down. As for the touchdowns, Ekeler had 70% of the Chargers carries inside the 5-yard line last season. I don't think that number sticks, especially going to the Commanders where he's got Brian Robinson, who is also around like 61, 62% of the carries inside the 5-yard line. You've got Jaden Daniels, who's a runner as well. I can keep going on and on. The Cliff Kingsbury system is more gap centric for runs, which Austin Ekeler succeeds more in zone run schemes. Like there's a lot that goes here. The whole thing is touchdowns and receptions are going to be taken away from him. You've got a 29-year-old running back coming off an injury that really affected him last season, going to a team that has a running quarterback, a rookie quarterback at that. I don't know, Dave. Like we talk about this upside. I'm not into a guy that I'm drafting as running back 33 right now at his current average draft position. There seems to be very little upside. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe other people are seeing the upside. I don't know that I see it. You and I both have him ranked around running back 36 and 37 respectively. I think I'd rather have Brian Robinson Jr. or other upside committee guys like Trey Benson and Chase Brown and Blake Corum. Like those guys have more appeal to me with higher upside at this point. Am I crazy?
I agree. I think the only I agree with everything you're saying about being down on Austin Eckler, and I am as well. I think the one little flaw in your logic, though, is that you talk about
There's no
how
flaws in your logic.
what Jaden Daniels did in college and what he'll do in the NFL. We've talked a lot about the Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray going to Cliff Kingsbury and Jaden Daniels and kind of project that going forward. We saw it. I just looked the numbers up because I had a hunch and the numbers backed it up. We saw Kyler Murray, his deep ball attempts were cut in half from his final year in college to his first year in the NFL. So I think Cliff Kingsbury does run that style of offense where he's going to try to change Jaden Daniels' tendencies a little bit. We saw Jaden Daniels forcing the ball deep downfield at LSU. We might see him more willing to check down, but I'm just concerned about all the other stuff you said about Austin Eckler and the dwindling efficiency and being on a new team and a lot of mouths to feed and all those sorts of things. So I think there could be like the occasional spike week from Eckler here and there. But I think Brian Robinson at the respective points in their careers is just a better all-around running back. And we saw Brian Robinson many times last year display surprisingly soft hands and ability to get open in the passing game as well. So where Austin Eckler historically has had a stranglehold on the passing down work, I don't even think he's going to have that this year. I think Brian Robinson and maybe even Chris Rodriguez could be a little bit more involved in the passing game than we want.
Good old C-Rod. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, wasn't there talk? I don't know if I just made this up, but I thought there was talk near the end of last season that Eckler was like, I don't know if I want to keep playing football. Like, if there's somebody who's starting to consider that, like, yeah, and I love Austin Eckler, but I agree with you guys completely. He's just not there anymore. Which is so sad.
I'm willing to bet just about every NFL player who's over 30 sitting there after week 18 icing their knees is probably saying to themselves, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I think that's just pretty common once you start getting up there in age.
Poor man.
Also, I just want to go back. There's no flaw in my logic. Just thought we should say that. I don't know, man. Like we run into it all the time.
On your logic, no world where there's a flaw in your logic.
No, absolutely not. No. I think we do try to see this a lot of times where sometimes it works where a coordinator or coach can change a quarterback's tendencies, but we've also seen for years and years and years where like the team is trying to stop Josh Allen from being an infant running around with mom's phone, and that's just who he is. Like that's just kind of their play. I think you're right though, Dave. You are right. Like there is a very realistic scenario here where Cliff Kingsbury tells him, "Hey, we need you to check down." Right.
Because Cliff Kingsbury, he has that very specific, like he has that air raid attack. Like Cliff Kingsbury is the guy who took prime DeAndre Hopkins and said, yeah, you can do everything, but in order to fit into my offense, we're going to stick you out left and you're going to be wide on every single play and you're going to run 10-yard curl routes. I mean, this guy like nuked prime DeAndre Hopkins. Sometimes I worry that the ego for Cliff Kingsbury, sometimes, good coaches play to the people on their team. I don't know if Cliff Kingsbury is at that point in his career yet. I think he just tries to push people into roles, whether they belong or not. We saw this guy nerf Christian Kirk. We saw him nerf DeAndre Hopkins. Hopefully he has learned from some of these struggles that he's had over the years, but I don't know if I'm willing to say it yet.
I 100% agree with that. Yes.
The nerfer. All right, Dave, who is your second faller here? And why is it Kyren Williams, the Rams running back? They're going to drag you in the comments for this one.
Yeah, I know they're going to, and I don't really care. I've already had so many people telling me that I was right on Kyren Williams right after the draft. And yeah, I caught a lot of flack for it. I was saying to sell Kyren Williams in season last year in redraft, and a lot of people went on to win championships on the back of Kyren Williams. But to see what they did this offseason, it's impossible to ignore. And I'm not saying that Kyren Williams is toast. I'm still drafting him where he's going right now in like the mid to late second round. I'd like to see him in round 3, but I'm still willing to take the risk because we know the upside is there. But to ignore the draft selection of Blake Corum is just crazy to me. That is an indictment on Kyren Williams, whether you want to believe it or not. Blake Corum is younger, faster, stronger, more explosive, bigger. I don't know if I said bigger, younger, strong. He's everything. Like, he does everything better than Kyren Williams does right now. And there was obviously some concern that the workload Kyren Williams saw last year was wearing on him a little bit as he picked up multiple injuries. I'm not sitting here saying that Blake Corum is now the RB1 in Los Angeles and Kyren Williams is out of a job. But we have seen Sean McVay willing to just kind of change his RB1 frequently and without hesitation. So I'm a little bit concerned here. But I think the big thing for me, the biggest worry, is that there is some sort of a split, and that split comes when they get inside the red zone. Blake Corum, with his size and with his burst and power, profiles to be more of the goal line back. And if Kyren Williams does lose that work inside the red zone, that would just crush his fantasy value. Last year, he had 15 scrimmage touchdowns, which was second among all running backs, or I'm sorry, third among all running backs behind just Christian McCaffrey and Raheem Mostert. So if he loses out on that goal line work, we're not looking at the same production we saw last year. So I'm still willing to take the risk because we know the upside is there, but there is a dangerous floor for Kyren Williams with where he's getting drafted right now.
Haven't we seen 5 different leading rushers for that offense over the last 5 years?
Yeah, like Darrell Henderson was an RB1 for a stretch, and I can't even remember all the guys, but like Sean McVay can prop
Sony
up
Michel.
anybody. Sony Michel, yeah, I could throw pads on and I could go for 60 yards and a touchdown in Sean
relax.
McVay's offense.
All right, relax. Also, I really want
5
the
years ago, maybe.
screenshot. I want the screenshot of someone telling you were right, because the commenters hate telling you that you're right. I never see it happen. So please send me those screenshots. Julia, let's go to your next faller here. There's a common theme here that we have, and we're done with the olds. We want the olds to be out. And maybe this is less about him being old and just a lot more about the situation. So tell us why Keenan Allen is falling down your rankings.
I love Keenan Allen, and I'm very sad to put him here too. I mean, Keenan Allen is a PPR god, right? Like, if you had him in a PPR league, you were winning, right? His past season targets last year, he had 150. Year before, 89. That year, he only played 10 games. Year before that, 157. 2020, 147. And I could carry on. Like, if you had Keenan Allen, you were having at least 130 targets, right? And now 32-year-old Keenan Allen goes to Chicago, which I think will be an incredible offense. And I'm not just saying that because Dave's on the podcast. But I think Chicago is going to blow us away. But Keenan Allen doesn't need to be the one there. He doesn't even really need to be the 2, if you're asking me. So you have someone who missed 4 games last year due to injury. He's going to an offense where you have DJ Moore's going to be the one. I think that Roma Dunze is one of my favorite rookies, and I think he can battle Keenan Allen to be the 2 there. You have Cole Kmet. You have DeAndre Swift, who's going to catch some passes. He's only on a 1-year deal, right? Keenan's only on a 1-year deal there. And he's just in that sort of transitional period that we see all these guys get to, right? There's just this year when they're the one and then they go somewhere else. I think DeAndre Hopkins is kind of in that role too. And it's like, yeah, they'll have some spike weeks. Keenan Allen will have 1 or 2 really great weeks, but he's not going to be the main guy that Caleb's looking for. He's just not. And, yeah, and that's what it's going to be, and we're going to really see the harm in the lack of targets there. I want to hear what Dave has to say on this.
Oh, I'm with you. I made a bet a couple of months ago with one of my buddies who was like just head over heels for Keenan Allen, so excited about the signing. And this was before they even drafted Roma Dunze. And I bet on his under 1,000 yards. Because I
100% under 1,000 yards. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be able to hit 1,000 yards. And I don't know if you saw recently, there was a company that I will not name because we don't do that on this show, but there was a company who had an AI projection model that had Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, and DJ Moore all finishing with 1,000+ yards. No rookie quarterback in NFL history has supported 2,000-yard receivers, let alone 3. I mean, for Keenan Allen to pay off at his ADP, we would need 2 things. One, either Caleb Williams is the best rookie quarterback in NFL history, or the more likely is that DJ Moore gets injured. And if DJ Moore
Yeah.
gets injured, then there's a path of relevancy to Keenan Allen. But if Keenan Allen, or I'm sorry, if DJ Moore and Rome Odunze both stay healthy, it's
Yeah.
going to be really, really tough to see a world where Keenan Allen does pay off as ADP.
Keenan Allen is going to be better for actual football than fantasy football.
Yeah.
And
And I think
that's
he's going to be
hard.
great for Caleb Williams' development.
Great, fantastic. That's who you want to have as a security blanket. You want to have Keenan Allen there, 100%. Yeah.
Guys, I think there's also a reasonable expectation that maybe even in 2 wide receiver sets, Keenan Allen might come off the field
I
in
think
favor of a more explosive young Rome Odunze. I'm not saying all the time, Dave. I see you going back
No, I'm
and
saying,
forth, but
and
it's possible.
he gets
it's a
tired.
hot topic in Bears Twitter. Okay, it's a hot topic. Who is coming off the field in 2 wide receiver sets? And
I love it. I
everybody,
love when we all just latch onto these stupid
God.
arguments that don't really
And none of
matter.
us
Like
know.
it's
Pick
a
it apart.
microcosm
Pick it
within the
apart.
whole thing, and we're just like, 2 wide receiver sets, man. All right, let's get into my next faller. You like that transition? I go from
That was great. The
good,
old man voice
very
is great.
professional,
Yeah.
very quick. My next faller, another older guy, another receiver, another person who is kind of stuck in a situation that is less than ideal, a crowded offense. Talking about Stefon Diggs.
Yes.
There's a lot of up and down. There are still plenty of people that believe in him, and I'm not going to shame them, because like this is still a thing that could happen where Stefon Diggs is still productive. But I want to take a look at last year, and I want to take a look at the setting that he's in. He was a wide receiver 55 in fantasy points over the final 8 weeks. Now, I know that we want to say that a lot of that is only on Joe Brady, but some of his downfall kind of started a little bit before Brady took over. And it was actually one of the big kind of chess pieces or dominoes to fall that led to the change in the offense, was that things just simply weren't working with Stefon Diggs, and he kept getting force-fed the ball. And if you head on over to Reception Perception, Matt Harmon, former football guy, by the way, and pay for Reception Perception, it's awesome. Go look at it. You can see that Stefon Diggs kind of started to struggle a little bit on some of those deeper routes. And it's not necessarily that he wasn't getting schemed open. It was sometimes that he couldn't get open, or he couldn't come down with the ball. And then, yes, there are times where he's not getting schemed properly. But now he heads on over to a team, the Houston Texans, who CJ Stroud had the absolute highest ADOT amongst all quarterbacks in the NFL last year. But he joins a wide receiver group that has players that are better at running the deep routes than him, Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Then you've got guys near the line of scrimmage, Dalton Schultz and Joe Mixon, that are going to be catching passes as well. The Stefon Diggs thing to me feels a lot like the Keenan Allen thing, where it's going to be very good for CJ Stroud and the Texans and for football, for NFL football. Maybe not as great for fantasy football. And I know there's going to be much to be said about the whole like Ken Dorsey left and Joe Brady took over for the Bills offense. A lot of the usage was really similar. I'll say this. One of the big things that changed, was there was more design plays for Stefon Diggs. It went from 13 to 20% design plays, and the yards per route run dropped from 2.4 to 1.4. So that's why you do see Stefon Diggs running more of those routes closer to the line of scrimmage, running those curls, getting those screens. My fear is this. Maybe, and we don't see this because we're not there. We're not at practice. Maybe Stefon Diggs doesn't have that ability to win deep anymore. And maybe he's going to be kind of the safety blanket for CJ Stroud underneath, a guy who doesn't necessarily need a safety blanket. And there's a world where he becomes the third option in Houston, behind Nico Collins, behind Tank Dell. And right now, and Dave, we've been talking about this ADP and where it's at, especially on Underdog. I think it's kind of nuts that he's wide receiver 17 coming off the board right now in the 4th round of drafts. On Football Guys, he's ranked as a wide receiver 28. I've got him around the same spot there, wide receiver 28. I mean, Julia, you're shaking your head too. What are your worries with Stefon Diggs?
I just don't want him anywhere near any of my teams. I mean, that Houston team is peppered with so many weapons. I mean, you even have I don't know if they're going to end up on the team. You got Noah Brown still on there. They drafted Cade Stover. You have so many people there. And I always have this nagging thing in the back of my head. is Stefon Diggs kind of like not a good guy? Like, I wonder, like, there's always like these, like, he gets on Twitter and he's kind of like poking at bruises. And I wonder if he's not really that sort of team player where it becomes, and again, I have no idea. We're not there. We're not practice. We're not in the locker room. Like, when it comes down to, a tiebreaker between two guys, if one guy over here doesn't seem like he's, all in for the team, and this guy over here feels like he's all about it, I'm going to throw it to that guy, right? Like, if that's the tiebreaker. And it just seems like when he's leaving teams, there's all this drama. He feels like a real drama guy. And
I'm sure the Bills fans in the comments are going to be right there with you.
They're going to go
big
nutty.
thumbs up on that.
I mean, I think you can trace that back to when he was traded. Like, people were shocked when he was traded from Minnesota. They're like, wait, this is like a young ascending talent that you guys have on a cheap rookie contract. Like, it was crazy to trade Stefon Diggs at the time. And they did. And then I think maybe now we have a clearer picture of why he was traded away from Minnesota. But Alfredo, I looked it up. As far as deep receiving grades, like on passes 20 plus yards downfield, PFF's grade matches the narrative that you're spinning here that Stefon Diggs wasn't good. Like, if you look last year on deep pass attempts, Stefon Diggs was in the same range as Allen Lazard and Devontae Parker. Like, it was not good for Stefon Diggs on deep balls last year.
Yeah. And I think it's tough to see a guy that struggled doing the thing that his new quarterback was so successful at, and that his other counterparts in the same position group are so good at. And the relationship that's already there with Tank Dell, because like that's the other thing, that's the intangible thing that's not data driven. The relationship of CJ Stroud with Tank Dell and Nico Collins is already there. So whatever Stefon Diggs does in this offseason, he's got to kind of overcome that. And what happens if he is the third guy in that pecking order? Is he going to be unhappy? Does this all of a sudden turn into a whole nother thing? I know that's why all the talking heads in sports media have been saying they don't like this trade despite the low cost value. And Bills fans were rejoicing that they were able to get a second round pick. So
there's going to be a 1 year deal too. Is he on a 1 year deal with Houston? I think he is. They can get out of it, can't they?
Yeah, they bought out the rest of the deal. Yeah.
And I'll just say it. I don't care how spicy it is. I think Tank Dell can do everything Stefon Diggs can do, and
that's
probably can do it all better right now.
That's Taco Bell mild sauce, sir. Not impressed. All right, let's move along here, guys, to our third and final fallers, where all three of us are going to be talking about tight ends. Who doesn't love a good tight end? Dave, let's talk about your tight end, Cole Kmet.
Yeah, I mean, I've liked Cole Kmet for a long time. I think in Dynasty, I'm still holding out. He's still just 24 years old, I believe, going into his age 24 season, if I'm correct. He's a good player, but so much of projections for a single season come down to opportunity, and there just isn't much opportunity here for Cole Kmet. I don't have any notes on this one. I'm just shooting from the hip here. He's going to be the fourth option for a rookie quarterback. We already talked about why we're low on Keenan Allen. We're low on Cole Kmet for all the same reasons. When we were talking about Ben Sinnott in last week's episode, I said that I preferred Sinnott because I think he has an easier path to targets. Cole Kmet is good, but he blocks a ton, and he's going to be at best the fourth option on this team. So yeah, I'm out on Cole Kmet. That's all I got.
Did the Bears also sign Gerald Everett?
Yes, and Gerald Everett, if you look, has had a very strange career path where he has followed Shane Waldron everywhere. They played together in Los Angeles with Rams, played together in Seattle, and now he follows him over to Chicago as well. I think a lot of people, when they look at Cole Kmet, he's good and he's young, and those are both great things that we want to see, but his usage right now is so similar to what we saw in like an early career George Kittle, where he is such a good blocker that it impedes his ability to score a lot of fantasy points because he's got his hand in the dirt and he's blocking on a lot of passing plays. And especially now with them having three very viable pass catchers in the wide receiver room, they're going to ask him to run even fewer routes. So like Cole Kmet, like the player, I think the Bears were really smart to lock him up on a long-term deal. Don't like his 2024 outlook whatsoever.
It's going to be huge in the points per block league.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the rage now, Dave. All right.
Points per
More tight ends. Points per hand. And what do you go? 2 hands. Then double? All right. Let's get to our next tight end. We got another youngin, another young tight end who has been, let's bring it back, Dave, usurped. Oh, this show is just rocking with vocab right now. But Julia, you are dropping Michael Mayer from your rankings. He's going lower and lower in the fantasy rankings for you. So talk to us a little bit about Michael Mayer.
Down my rankings. Michael Mayer, tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders. Look, they took him with the second round pick. What was it, last year? He's young. He's 22. They didn't do tons with him last year, but I think we were all kind of hopeful for a future for him. And then they went and drafted Brock Bowers, which was kind of a surprise, I think, to everybody, including my dynasty roster, which I was really irritated at. Look, they drafted Brock Bowers at 13th overall. And yeah, they might be playing some 2 tight end sets, but what are we going to do with Michael Mayer here? I talked about it a little bit with like the risers with the running game over there. Vegas is got a running identity. That's what they're doing. So now we have 2 tight ends. We have a team that's committed to running the ball. And you have a quarterback battle between Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. Again, 2 quarterbacks that are fine, but they're not going to be, chucking it down the field ridiculously. So it's like, why am I drafting Michael Mayer, right? Like, it's just, I think that ship has sailed, and I'm really, really sad about it because I have him in Dynasty in a bunch of places. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about him? Why would they draft Brock Bowers here?
Yep.
Best player available. I think that they wanted to take a quarterback, and the quarterbacks that they wanted were off the board. We talked about it leading up to the draft, where I thought the Raiders were going to go with Penix.
Yes.
And with Penix surprisingly going to Atlanta, I think that they were just on full tilt, and they were like, well, we're not getting the quarterback we wanted, so let's pivot to best player available, Brock Bowers. I think it was a smart thing to do. Like, I don't think the Raiders have any intention of contending this season. So when you are deep in a rebuild the way that they are with a first-year head coach, I think that's what you do, is you take the best player available. Devontae Adams, probably looking at the end of his career, if not this year, very, very soon. So they could have a fun kind of 2 tight end sets that they can play with in the coming years with Brock Bowers and Mike Mayer, but not excited.
I could also see a world where there we go. Said it again. Sorry. Where they package Mayer and do a trade, at the end of the year, midway through or beginning of next year. Yeah. Just be like, we know you're decent. I know we can get a good value for you. Send you on our way. Yeah.
Mayer is a guy through all the drafts I've done so far this offseason. I have not touched Mayer.
Is he undraftable now for redraft people?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, even in best ball, I'm not sure where he's going. He's going as tight end 35 in best ball, which means that he isn't even getting drafted in most best ball leagues, where a lot of people, everybody's drafting at least 2 tight ends. A lot of people are drafting 3 tight ends. He's going undrafted in a lot of those.
That's tough. He's talented. That sucks.
Well, I'm going to close this out here with one more tight end who, has been incredibly talented. He's had it throughout his career. And last year, he kind of gets this breakout. And I'm talking about David Njoku, tight end for the Cleveland Browns. And he's falling down my rankings because of a lot of things that happened last season that really need context, okay? I mentioned this before when I talked about Amari Cooper in the last episode. Kevin Stefanski has Ken Dorsey now, who Dorsey tends to use a lot more 3 and 4 wide receiver sets. He wants to spread out the field, and this is something that actually kind of works for Deshaun Watson. That's what he prefers, having this, these kind of speedy wide receivers that can stretch things out a little more like a spread offense of like what he was able to run at Clemson years and years ago. The team adds Jerry Jeudy. They still have Elijah Moore. In recent years, they've drafted Cedric Tillman, David Bell, now Jamari Thrash. They've actually got a really big stable of wide receivers that they want to be able to deploy. They want to have more speed. We don't know if we're going to see the same Nick Chubb. This team seems to be ready to get more receivers involved and more passing game going on. And so you'd think, okay, well, more passing, that's got to be good for David Njoku. The thing is that I don't know that he's necessarily going to be top 2 on this team in targets. And Dave, you mentioned that with tight ends about how important that could be. And I think a lot of people are going to look at what Njoku did last year during the fantasy playoffs with Joe Flacco, where he led all tight ends in fantasy scoring. And I think most people are going to assume he can replicate that. But when you take a look at these splits, David Njoku with Deshaun Watson, weeks 1, 2, 3, 9, 10, those 5 games with Deshaun Watson, 5.5 targets, 4 receptions per game, 38 yards per game. We're talking 6.3 half PPR points per game, tight end 18 during those games with Deshaun Watson. Then all of a sudden, without Watson, you plug in Flacco, It's 9 targets, 6 receptions, 78 yards, 15 half PPR points per game, tight end 1. And he's probably somewhere between that. I don't think he's the tight end 18 in points per game. I think Deshaun Watson gets better, but there's enough concern here with them adding Jerry Jeudy, with them drafting another wide receiver, with them changing up the offense, and with Joe Flacco not being their quarterback, that I'm saying, guys, I'm taking a look at it right now. Why am I seeing David Njoku be posted up as the tight end 7 in spots, tight end 8 in other spots? I've actually got him as the tight end 10 for me. I'm putting him behind Jake Ferguson because I think Jake Ferguson ends up being second on his team in targets, a team that's going to have to pass the ball a lot without Dan Quinn running their defense and without the running game being effective. Jake Ferguson to me seems like I don't know, a more reliable fantasy tight end than David Njoku. Am I crazy on this? I know the upside is there for Njoku, but let's turn off the best ball brain for just a little bit, because I think the floor is also pretty bad with Njoku.
I mean, I see, like, when I look at the tight end market this year, it's so easy for me to just kind of clump these guys together, where I see like the top 5, Kelsey Laporta, Andrews, McBride, and Kincaid, such a clear-cut top 5 there. And then you see this other mini tier, Kittle, Pitts, Ingram, where they are the very defined kind of, second tier. And then for me, it's Ingram, Njoku, and Ferguson are also very, very interchangeable. It's hard for me to really split hairs between those guys. So, like, I've got no Njoku ahead of Ferguson by one spot, but I don't have a strong stance one way or the other. These guys are back to back in my rankings. I think that they're very similar. As a long-time David Njoku tout, I'll be the first to admit, seeing it come together last year was beautiful. Like, I've stashed this guy in so many leagues for so long. We knew the upside was there. He had all the measurables, the draft capital, the athleticism, all of that. And then I think we got the taste and we just got really excited that we said, yes, like, we're putting him in our top 10. But the reality is everything you said is true. And he doesn't have a role that lends to a lot of fantasy production. I don't know if you mentioned it or not, Alfredo, but he takes 55% of his snaps in line. That's terrible. Like, when you look at all of the elite fantasy tight ends, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, all these guys, they're playing in the slot, they're playing out wide. These guys are not lining up on the line. They are still lining Njoku up there on 55% of his snaps.
And that number is going to get
awful.
worse. That number is going to get worse with 4 wide receiver sets out there.
And the thing, when he does play in the snap, which is few and far in between, he is one of the most efficient players to play out of the snap, out of the slot. What I want them to do is just say, you know what, we're just going to give you that role that works for all of these other guys, and we're just play you in the slot on 80% of your snaps, and then occasionally in line and a little bit out wide. But that's just not the role that they want for him, and it's silly for us fantasy minds to ignore that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the recency bias thing. Sorry, that we've talked about several times. Like he ended the season, and if I remember correctly, he was playing. They were really good matchups for tight ends too, if I remember correctly, and that was part of like why I was targeting him in middle of the season in trades and stuff. And it becomes more of a quarterback. It's like less of a Njoku issue and more of like the people surrounding him that will bring it down. It's so much of a quarterback issue as well. So
it's
I was just wondering, like, can either of you even name who the quarterback was when Deshaun Watson was the quarterback in Houston?
Who the tight end was?
Oh, I know, buddy. I know because he's the backup tight end on the Browns right now. Oh, Brevin Jordan was there, but also Jordan Akins. Like,
he was there for.
It was a bunch of randos.
Yeah, like and what did those guys ever do in fantasy? That's what I'm saying. Like, he was great. He was throwing for 4,000, 4,500 yards per season. But he never has been somebody to look to as tight ends.
Right.
That's just who Deshaun Watson is.
Weird, almost like he can't change quarterbacks' tendencies in the NFL, despite whatever their coaches try to do. I don't odd.
Shocking.
Weird. Flawed logic, though. Never mind. I'm so petty. I love that we did this late. Thanks for being on board, everybody. Well, there we go. We talked about 9 players falling down our fantasy draft rankings. Guys, it's May. There's going to be so many changes to these rankings. Some of these players might move up. There's going to be a lot to change. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. That way you can check out all the episodes and all the updates we do. I want to give a big thank you to our special guest, Julia Papworth, for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, you guys. It's so fun. So fun.
And for myself, for Dave, I want to thank everybody for watching and listening all the way through. We're going to be back next week with our breakout running backs and wide receivers. So make sure that you tune in for that one, and be sure to subscribe to the daily news updates here at Football Guys. Everything you need to win in your fantasy football leagues sent straight to you by Joe Bryant himself. For myself, for Dave, for Julia, thank you guys for watching and listening. We'll see you next time. Adios.